Next up, we have our keynote host, Matthew Granade. Matthew is the Chief Market Intelligence Officer at Point72. He is an experienced business builder at the intersection of finance, advanced analytics, and technology. Matthew also runs Point72 Ventures, the firm's venture capital unit, which funds early stage companies in financial technology, enterprise automation, AI, technology infrastructure, and cybersecurity. Needless to say, Matthew is a pioneer in the world of data and AI, and he will be discussing his emerging thesis on how models are overtaking the world and how that applies to the world of hedge funds and what that can mean for your career. So with the session titled Investing in a Model-Driven World, please welcome Matthew.
Thank you, Dipali. It's great to be here today, and I really appreciate that very kind introduction. By way of background, as Dipali said, I wear a few different hats at Point72, which is Steve Cohen's investment firm, but they're all centered on data science. And just to kind of give you a little bit of background, overall, we manage about $19 billion for endowments, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and other sophisticated investors. And we manage it in a range of strategies from discretionary equities to quant equities to macro. And we also do some venture capital and private equity. On the hedge fund side, I'm the Chief Market Intelligence Officer, so I oversee all of our data and proprietary research efforts. And I also manage our central book, which collects stock ideas from a broad array of sources in an effort to systematically monetize them. And as Dipali mentioned, I also run Point72 Ventures, which is our venture capital business, where we focus in part on investing in AI-driven companies. And prior to Point72, I co-founded Domino Data Labs, where we created a model management system used by some of the most analytically advanced companies in the world. So data science is at the core of my career. And in particular, I'm constantly searching out ways that we can combine people and machines to run our businesses more effectively, while also identifying the companies, especially startups, that are doing the same and that we should be investing in. So today I want to talk about the ways we think about machines and people and how they can coexist and how they can help each other accomplish more, because it's really kind of at the core of our business model, this idea of person plus machine. And I'm particularly excited to deliver these thoughts to this group of rising leaders in data and analytics. I think your expertise and training is going to position you really well for success in the new model-driven world, which is what I want to talk about today. I'd also like to note how proud we are to partner with Correlation One on their empowerment program to help increase diversity in the data science field. Data and AI are changing how our industry and how the world operates, but ultimately these tools are only as effective as the people who analyze the numbers and build the models. And finding and training the next generation of great data scientists is critical to our success, both as a company and also to the world. But that success is largely dependent on having people who see things other people miss and recognize developments other people don't. So let me talk a little bit about kind of how I see the data and analytics field right now overall. The big picture trends and technological advances impacting the hedge fund industry are the same as the things that are impacting nearly every industry. There's an explosion in data, there's cheaper and more powerful compute, and there's the creation of all sorts of new powerful algorithms in artificial intelligence like deep learning and GPT-3. As you all know, the amount of data being collected in the world has exploded. In fact, 90% of the world's data was created in the last 2 years. And COVID and the digitalization of everything has made that even more true. I was thinking the other day about how you used to go to the movies, at least occasionally, and in addition to watching Netflix and Apple and things like that. Now everything you watch is on Apple and Netflix, which means pretty much every viewing experience you have is digital, and all that data of what you're watching is captured. Whereas 6, 7, 8 months ago, there was at least some percentage, call it 20, 30% of the world's viewing data that wasn't captured. So data is exploding. Compute power is also cheaper and more powerful than ever. And scientists and engineers have made major breakthroughs in the fields of artificial intelligence. The best algorithms in the world began to achieve better than human performance in computer vision 4 years ago. And lately, tasks like speech analysis and natural language processing have achieved superhuman performance. And modern algorithms can even learn from directly interacting with their environment, first in simulation, then in the real world. We've seen this allow computers to do things like put a tire on a car and correctly torque the bolts, which seems like a very simple task, but is a very difficult one for a machine to maneuver without over tightening and those sorts of things. This stuff makes great headlines. Computers are beating the world champion at the ancient game of Go. We're on the verge of cars that drive themselves, at least maybe most of the time, and bots that can order toilet paper or a carton of milk without lifting a finger. Or kind of one of my favorite examples of what computers can do these days is master the New Yorker's iconic prose style, which is an online demo. If you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth checking out. So these are heady times, and things are changing quickly, and that means enormous opportunity, and it also means some real risks to a lot of businesses. And so keeping up and let alone getting ahead is a day-to-day, minute-to-minute job. So I approach kind of all these trends, the ones I just talked about, through the lens of a business person. I always find myself wondering, what great businesses can we build to take advantage of all these changes? What we've seen is that the explosion in data and the advanced analytical techniques has spawned a new, potent business model, which I like to call the model-driven business. And it's my view that model-driven businesses will rule the world. And the good news for this crowd is that they'll be built by people like you with data science backgrounds. That business model, the model-driven business model, is the real reason that all the buzzwords like big data and machine learning and artificial intelligence deserve so much attention. I also see this business model as the most effective way that companies are utilizing the best of what humans and machines can do together. So what's a model? This crowd probably doesn't need the definition, but just so we're all on the same page, in the way I think about it, as a model is a decision framework, and it uses logic based on an algorithm that's derived from data rather than a set of rules explicitly programmed or decisions made by people. So you have data that enters a logical framework, an algorithm that outputs some sort of prediction, and that at core is what a model is. My co-founder at Domino likes to say that data is like oil and models are like engines. Oil on its own is useless, but you put the two together, data and models, oil and engines, and you can run a car, heat a house, send a rocket to space. Models process the fuel and convert it into something useful. The output of a model, as I mentioned, is a prediction, like a recommendation, which is just a prediction of what someone would like, or some generally prescribed action based on a probabilistic assessment. But I think this is where the engine analogy starts to break down. Once a model is created, it can learn from its successes and failures with tremendous speed and sophistication. A model is like an engine that can tighten its own battery cables or replace a filter without a mechanic. Models are the real source of power behind any data tool, because models lead to action based on prediction, and they are constantly getting better. So if that's what a model is, then what's a model-driven business? Put simply, a model-driven business uses models to power the key decisions in its business process, whether that be creating revenue or cost efficiencies based on those results. Building this system requires a mechanism, often software-based, to collect data, crunch data, and build models. And then it needs a mechanism, again, often software-based, to deliver or act on the suggestions of those models. Let me give you an example that I think will make all this a bit more concrete. Netflix is a great example of a model-driven business. Netflix is a $36 billion market cap company. Its value comes not only from having a pile of content, movie and TV shows that people want to watch, but from having a model that compels people to stay tuned in by finding the content that they want to watch. So how does that model work? It starts when you sign up for Netflix. The company takes your name and your billing information, and by connecting to other data sources, is able to build a profile of you, your age, your income, your interests. Its systems then watch what you do on the platform. What shows do you go to straight away? What shows do you watch from start to finish? What shows can you never finish? What shows do you never touch? With that, is able to build a set of content recommendations just for you. And here's the staggering thing. 75% of the content consumption on Netflix is driven by that recommendation engine. A mere 1 in 4 choices Netflix users make can come exclusively from people watching what they, quote, want to watch. And as you use the platform more, the recommendation engine gets better, which in turn leads to a better experience, which leads to you using the platform more. So it produces a better product, which attracts more customers, which attracts more data, which allows you to make a better product and attract more customers. It's a self-reinforcing cycle that naturally provides an inherent moat around the business. That's what makes model-driven businesses so powerful, the flywheel. This is the same framework that we use at our hedge fund to interpret a wide array of other successful businesses today. Amazon, Spotify, Tencent, among others. One point might point out that all of these businesses are largely consumer tech and thus a fairly narrow slice of the economy. But that's not what we're seeing when we look at the early stage companies being created today. What we're seeing is that this same model-driven approach can be applied across industries, in call centers, managed security services, printed circuit board construction, loan processing, furniture manufacturing, drug trials, and so on. Let me take a different example from that very last thing, drug trials, and that's not consumer, and tell you a little bit about it. It's called Deep6, and it's one of the companies that we're invested in our venture fund. And I think it's a really interesting example of a model-driven business. Deep6 is a startup that works in the clinical trial space, which is how drugs get tested so the FDA can approve them. To conduct clinical trials, the first thing you need to do is find relevant patients, and that's very hard to do. Historically, it's been done by having researchers go through medical files and then discussing the cases with doctors. Deep6 has taken a model-driven approach. It works with hospital systems to access electronic medical records. It then tells the model the characteristics that create a good fit for a given trial. So for example, maybe you want somebody who's had a heart issue but doesn't have diabetes, or maybe you want somebody who has both. The model then assigns a probability score to every patient in the system that reflects the chance that they are a good match for the trial. The approach has literally cut months off the time required to put together a patient pool for a clinical trial, which saves pharma companies money and gets cutting-edge drugs into people's hands sooner. The list of model-driven companies goes on and on. Model-driven businesses work, and they work amazingly well. Their profit margins exceed the competition time and time again. So let me turn now to the finance industry, and in particular to hedge funds, to talk a little bit about how advances in models are driving change there. We think the most successful hedge funds will be the ones who can also figure out how to utilize models to improve their efficiency and accuracy by harnessing all this data and designing a system to quickly analyze it and act on it. Historically, hedge funds worked under an almost all-person little machine model. Firms like mine, Point72, were mostly considered discretionary shops. So were Millennium and Balyasny. We primarily employed discretionary portfolio managers and analysts who are terrific at thinking big, coming up with new ideas, and doing deep fundamental research on companies. Over time, the last 2 or 3 decades, technological capabilities grew, and another model came to be: systematic funds like Two Sigma, D.E. Shaw, and Rintech. These firms hit the market using machines to trade stocks algorithmically and keep their portfolios mathematically balanced, using advanced statistics and quant methods. Interestingly, for the first couple of decades, these two approaches didn't mix much, and were mostly progressing on a sort of parallel track. In fact, the gap was so big that you had some allocators who literally would only pursue one approach or the other. It was almost like a religion. At Point72, we're trying to think about this a little bit differently. We're one of the handful of firms today that are experimenting with different ways to meld discretionary and quant together. So if discretionary investing is on one end of the spectrum and quant is on the other, we're trying to pioneer ways of finding what's in between. We've created 2 different platforms that allow people and machines to collaborate and excel at what each does best, and ultimately pick stocks and run our best business. But to be clear, model-driven thinking is critical to both. Let me explain each of the models and talk a little bit about how they work. One of our platforms we call the machine plus person approach. This puts machines front and center, essentially using models to learn from the vast array of data sources at our disposal. It all starts with an understanding of what people and machines do best. People are great at idea generation because they can take in information, weigh it, and come to a recommendation in a way that a computer can't. That's because the markets are a very broad domain, affected by a myriad of factors, and our goals can become very complicated. People also have emotional intelligence, the ability to assess what isn't being said and understand context. Computers are good at removing bias and emotion from the decision-making process. Like knowing how best to efficiently enter a trade, computers are also good at processing a lot of information quickly and precisely. In this machine plus people approach, we have people develop the ideas. Then a machine can cross-check that work by running through a systematic checklist of the relevant data inputs. mathematical and statistical calculations, a range of considerations from portfolio construction and an execution standpoint. Our machines then use those determinations to decide whether or not something's a good idea and then construct a portfolio based on those conclusions. As an example of the kind of systematic logic we use and the kinds of stuff that our data scientists build, we think a lot about agreement and disagreement. Most of the stocks in our portfolio are covered by at least 4 or 5 analysts or portfolio managers within our firm. So what do you do when 2 people are long a stock and 2 people are short a stock? Is the answer different if 3 people are long and 1 person is short? It turns out the field of decision science, pioneered by Phil Tetlock, has a lot to say on that issue. So we build models using some of those principles to help us decide systematically what to do in each case. In the other model, what I'll call person plus machine, technology augments the person. We have some of the best discretionary investors in the world at Point72. So it's about equipping them with the right data, tools, and training to be efficient and make good decisions quickly in the markets. We spend a lot of time researching and sourcing hundreds of compliance-approved data sets, like credit card, geolocation, and data specific to airlines, cruise ships, hotels, healthcare industry, and a wide variety of other fields. The data on its own isn't magical. However, it's an important input that only firms of a certain size and scale can afford to provide. And that can also create the system that can analyze the data quickly and efficiently. When our PMs start considering an investment, we have a team of data scientists that can work alongside them to build proprietary information models, often using machine learning to make revenue predictions and traffic forecasts. Let me talk a little bit about tooling. Computers are great at processing millions of data points and teeing it up for our key decision makers. We're building tools to improve workflow for investing teams so they can focus on what matters, analyzing information, not aggregating it. Our proprietary tech platform aggregates content and data from a range of sources and then delivers that content to the investment teams across multiple channels. So for example, a key activity for many investment teams is to compare their analyst expectations versus the market consensus for key performance indicators. It's a time-consuming exercise to match and update our internal line items with the consensus because there's no consistency in language. A simple example of this is earnings per share. It could be spelled out like EPS, or it could be spelled out earnings per share, or it could be earnings, or it could be earnings/share, or a variety of other ways. So it's difficult to automate cleanly. To streamline this process, our research platform built a team of data scientists on our research platform built a model that ingests our analyst estimates and using an algorithm determines the corresponding consensus line item. There's a feedback loop into the system so that analysts can check and bless our model's suggestion. This saves them time, builds their confidence in the system, and improves the algorithm's understanding all at the same time. And look, it seems like a simple thing, but this is a task repeated a couple of dozen times a day by several hundred people. So the time savings is real. It's a very small example of how data science is making our firm more productive. Our investment professionals are really interested in the data and tools we're providing them and want to figure out how to incorporate it into their process, and in turn provide feedback about what data would be the most helpful to them. That open dialogue between our investment professionals and our data scientists is a key ingredient that lets the flywheel take off. Our investment professionals monitor the market and develop an innate sense of what makes certain stocks move. Their insights on the types of data and products that would be valuable to that process is crucial. And in turn, our data professionals spend the time finding, cleaning, and producing products off of that data. Let me try to make all this more concrete by sharing a recent example from the lockdown of how we use data. A lot of people at the start of the COVID pandemic thought that consumer spending would grind to a halt. No one was going out to shops or restaurants, plus people had lost their jobs or were worried about job security. But that didn't happen across the board, and we used data to understand which industries might thrive. One of the biggest winners of the shelter-in-place environment was the home improvement industry. Investors debated whether the economic uncertainty and fear of having contractors entering homes would present a headwind to the home improvement industry, including retailers such as Home Depot and Lowe's, and building product manufacturers and distributors like Trex in decking, or Pools and Pool, or Carrier Global and HVAC. To inform our investment professionals on consumer demand trends, we created dashboards that track consumer intent, as well as spending levels across different building product categories. We looked at an array of compliance-approved alternative data inputs. We use Google search trends and web traffic to get an early read on potential demand. We track search terms across topics like kitchen remodel, new outdoor deck, or HVAC repair. We parse clickstream data to understand the number of consumers visiting, say, the homedepot.com website, but also to understand the breakdown of what aisles and products were searched. To get a read on actual sales, we mined and tagged residential building permits, email receipts, and credit card data associated with the home improvement industry. For example, to track certain power tool sales, we mined email receipt data from home improvement retailers to see if power tool sales were growing during shelter in place. We mined residential building permits for mentions of cabinets, HVAC systems, and even termites. We then mapped credit card data to relevant retailers and industry-specific contractors to generate indices and model sales growth for the companies in the home improvement space. While strength in the home improvement sector is now common knowledge, our team was able to identify it early on in the lockdown and to keep our investment professionals informed on a near real-time basis. This is something we were talking about as early as March. The strength of demand we captured gave us a strong read on the improving health of the home improvement space. And if you're a data scientist at Point72, these are the kinds of exciting real-world problem solving with interesting data sets that you work on every day. So let me take a few minutes to offer some thoughts that you can use to frame your strategy as you think about your career. Everyone in this room is acquiring the tools and skills that will be imperative in today's economy, whether it be in tech, consumer, or the markets. The first question I would encourage everyone to ask is, what fascinates you? It's really the most important question any future data scientist needs to ask herself, and the possible answers are probably endless. For me, it's really two things. First, I really like building businesses that are analytical in nature. I like using data and models to understand the world. Second, I really like hard problems. That's why the markets are so fun, because they are always changing and adapting. It's also rewarding. You get quick, tangible results when you're right, and you're constantly learning because investing crosses all industries and geographies. But those are my answers to the questions. You'll have to figure out your own answers, and it's a very important question because you should work on things that you're passionate about. Then you have to ask yourself, what's your strategy? What decisions are you making to be successful? I've worked for two legends of the investment industry, Ray Dalio at the hedge fund Bridgewater and Steve Cohen now at Point72. Ray focused on macro investing, so trading the big global markets like currencies and bonds, and his approach was fundamental, meaning he looked at the underlying economic linkages that drove market behavior, and his process was systematic, meaning he created algorithms to make decisions. Steve primarily focuses on trading individual equities. His approach is fundamental in that he aims to understand companies from a bottoms-up perspective better than anyone else in the world. And his approach is discretionary in that he looks to highly skilled humans to make critical decisions. Two wildly successful individuals in the same industry with very different approaches to making money, and both of them rely heavily on data. So my answer to the question about strategy is finding the way to optimize both people and machines to find the companies, both public and private, that are poised for the greatest growth. The point is that even within industries, there are many different roles for data scientists and many people who are looking for your skill set. So you need to be intentional about what your strategy will be, and it has to be in an area that fascinates you. And then the last question that I'd encourage everyone to think about is who you're going to work for. It's a tough question, but perhaps the most urgent one you should consider as you make your first career choice. It's beneficial to work for someone who you believe in, but you should also consider how you will learn the most. Whose methods and thought processes do you want to be near to develop your own capabilities? In a rapidly changing industry, you should be very intentional about your learning strategy. After Domino, I was in a similar situation as many of you, trying to figure out what came next. Steve had suggested several times, why don't you come here? You clearly like to build things, and we can do that at Point72. We can do things in data science and venture capital and systematic investing. And one of the things that I think makes Steve really remarkable at what he does in this industry is just the restlessness and the dissatisfaction with everything that he sees, and this emphasis on what needs to be. I still remember the very first time I met him. My first question to him was, you have built a more enduring hedge fund than almost anyone else. There's 5 or 6 people like that. So why do you think that is? And he told me, because I've burned my firm to the ground 3 times before, and I'm getting ready to do it again. What he meant was that what is working today is not going to be profitable tomorrow. You have to constantly be changing the business in order to keep up. He has that restlessness deep inside of him, and that makes Point72 a very exciting place for someone to work with my skill set. So my advice to you is to try to find someone to work for who is similarly innovative and constantly looking to improve, because that's how you'll ensure you keep learning and you keep growing too. So that's my career advice: thinking about what fascinates you, thinking about your strategy for doing the things that fascinate you, and thinking about how you can learn what you need to learn to do those things. I hope this helps. I will say that what you're learning with Correlation 1 is going to position you to lead some of the most interesting changes our society is seeing in whatever field you choose. Thanks so much, and I'm happy to take a few questions.
Our first question, it's super interesting the way you described your model-driven investment approach. This seems like it could apply to public markets investing. Did you do something similar when you're deciding which startups to invest in?
That's a great question. Uh, well, we certainly think about being systematic when we do our startup investing. So, we have a fairly similar process that we use throughout, where we start by thinking about themes and industries that we like and why we like those industries. So, based on size and the amount of disruption they're experiencing. And then we have similar sort of frameworks for how we think about companies and management teams. And so throughout that process, we collect a lot of data, and we try to be very, like I said, very systematic in our process. What we haven't done is introduce a lot of machines to that yet. So we haven't automated a lot of that. But I think eventually we may get there. May not. It's hard to say for sure. But there's certainly a lot of lessons from systematic investing that you can apply, whether or not you fully automate something or not.
Very interesting. Excellent. Another question from Beth on the chat. There's been a lot of progress in applying data science to liquid public markets. Why do you think the applications into private and liquid markets have been so much slower? And do you see that changing?
Yeah, well, I think it's been slower because over very long horizons, like you're thinking about with VC, like 10 or 12 years, there's a lot more intangible factors that you're trying to think about. It requires a lot more thinking about second and third and fourth order consequences because, obviously you're 10 years down the road. I think the most effective uses of AI right now in the liquid markets are much closer in, and probably the very most effective uses of AI in liquid markets is, on a 30-second or maybe even less, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-minute time horizon. I think it can also be very effective on slightly longer time horizons, call it weeks or, maybe even less than a month. But the further out you go, sort of the more other variables come in, and it's very hard to kind of capture all of those things. Do I see that changing? Look, I think there are a couple of venture firms out there that have tried to be more systematic in what they're doing. And as I mentioned, we're trying to be more systematic in what we're doing. I think it's hard though to fully automate all that and sort of truly make it a machine exercise. But I do think that that more and more firms will start collecting data and being systematic. And I also think the algorithms will get better. And so maybe that time horizon where right now I was sort of saying you can do this stuff at sort of 2-3 weeks. I mean, maybe that does keep getting pushed out. But we have a long way to go until we reach 10 to 12 years, which is the general kind of timeline for venture.
Interesting. And maybe some of our graduates could be part of that change, building those algorithms.
They absolutely could. And look, I mean, I know a lot of venture firms, including our venture firm, that are looking to hire data scientists, and we're looking for it for the reasons I talked about, so that we can collect data and start to systematize things. But look, I think one of the mistakes that generally people make is, and it ties a little bit to the example I was giving about discretionary investing versus quant investing, is sort of trying to make it kind of all or nothing. And the fact is, there is this vast middle ground where, being rigorous in how you collect data, being rigorous in how you model and you think about the data, can be a very important input then into a human process. And so you can ultimately have a human make the final weighing decision, but that human will be making a better decision because of the structure that kind of led up to that. And I think that's what we believe on the venture side, at least at this point.
Fascinating. I have one more question from Phyllis on the chat. To what degree are you comfortable with making investment bets on machine learning models?
Well, I mean, I run a book at Point72, and machine learning models are a part of that whole process. What I will say is that we never we never just put data into the machine learning and sort of see what comes out and bet on it. We have some sort of hypothesis or view, and then usually the machine learning plays some important role in what I sort of almost call like taming the data. So as an example, I mentioned that we use a lot of compliance approved credit card data sets, and and so what we're getting there is we're getting transaction level data, and from all over the country about what people are spending at Starbucks and Chipotle and Home Depot, et cetera, et cetera. And machine learning is very powerful at taking all that information and figuring out the right way to weigh it, because obviously different data sets have different biases, and you need to sort of get to some view of that. And then what's great is that so machine learning has a role to play there, but ultimately, kind of the fundamental hypothesis of it is that companies will trade in line with their sales, or something like that, or that sales will be sales will be an important driver of how not all companies will trade. So I guess what I would sort of say is that I'm very comfortable using machine learning as a very powerful tool in a lot of different pieces of our process.
Amazing. So it is that machine plus person approach in action. Well, I know we're at time, so thank you again, Matthew, so much for your insights and really, really practical advice.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great, and I wish everyone a lot of luck.